Since 2018, StatCast data has allowed us to measure defense more accurately than we ever have. Its flagship defensive metric is fielding run value, how many runs a player has prevented on defense compared to the average player. This metric has singled out a few players above the rest. This is a chart that looks at the best 3 season spans the metric has ever recorded. For example, Bobby Witt Jr.'s 2023 to 2025 seasons were worth 41.5 runs on defense, which is good for the 9th best. We also have Harrison Bader, Dalton Varsho, Andres Gimenez, Brenton Doyle, Dansby Swanson, Alejandro Kirk, Francisco Lindor, and Nick Ahmed. This group has 14 gold gloves split amongst them and 2 platinum gloves. Both of these numbers will almost certainly go up once the 2025 winners get announced. These are clearly the best defenders of this generation and some of the best defenders the game has ever seen, but we are still missing the number 1 entry, and that is because he is far above the rest. Even amongst the best defenders of this generation, Patrick Bailey is an outlier. An outlier that is so clear that he might not just be the best defender in the league now, but the best defender the league has ever seen. I want you to think about this player, Andres Gimenez. You may have heard of him, but if not, I'll give you some background. He's won 3 straight Gold Glove awards. Every defensive metric in existence has him ranked near the top of the league the past 3 seasons, and you can find nearly endless analysis that praises his defensive play. The best defensive 3-year span that Gimenez recorded in his career was from 2022 to 2024. According to fielding run value in that time, he was worth roughly 42 runs. That's averaging 14 runs per year, which is well into the elite category. There are a few players that have had 3-season spans above Gimenez's best, which is not all that crazy as these guys are also elite defenders. Though what is crazy is the fact that Patrick Bailey's only 3 years in the league are worth nearly double compared to Gimenez, who's an elite defender in his own right. This is taking up an almost exponential distribution with Patrick Bailey on top. Seeing distributions on a chart like this isn't something that we've never seen before. Take the same chart, except this time it's the most 3-point shots made in the past 3 seasons in the NBA. It wouldn't take much of a genius to figure out that Steph Curry is at the top. He's well above other elite shooters like Klay Thompson, Malik Beasley, Buddy Hield, and Damian Lillard. This really isn't all that surprising. I mean, he is the best shooter of all time after all. So if that's the case, then what does that say about Patrick Bailey? Now, you might be saying this is all a bit much for a player who's in his 3rd year in the league, and most of the time I would agree with you. Though when a player has had the first 3 years that Patrick Bailey has had, it's easy to go against that rule. In 2023, his rookie year, he was the most valuable defender in the league. In 2024, he was also the most valuable defender in the league. And in 2025, once again, he was the most valuable. And second place isn't usually even close. By the numbers, Patrick Bailey is a generational defensive talent, though by the eye test, there isn't much to get excited about. To the untrained eye, all he does is sit behind the plate and catch a few pitches every game. I mean, how could that be better than this play? Dodgers outfielder Teoscar Hernandez slides and makes this snow cone grab, robbing Corbin Carroll of a single. This play does look pretty to the eyes, but what the eyes are not as good at computing is the fact that Hernandez traveled only 41 feet to catch this ball, and it had a hang time of 4.1 seconds. This type of batted ball is caught 99% of the time, which makes this play seem a lot less exciting than it actually is. While the numbers can take the value out of this, it puts the value into this, and this, and this, and this. Over the course of a full season, it's nearly impossible to appreciate what Patrick Bailey does with just your eyes, and that's why we need to go deeper. You can separate catcher defense into 3 distinct skills: throwing, blocking, and framing. Let's start off with throwing. When runners steal, it's on the catcher to throw them out. Or so that's what we used to think. But now, we realize that there are a lot of other factors that go into throwing out runners, as not all stolen bases are created equally. How quick the pitcher is to the plate, how big of a jump the runner gets, how fast the runner is, where the pitch is located, among even more factors. We can take all of these into account as input and estimate the probability that the runner is thrown out. Like on this play where Patrick Bailey threw out Trey Turner trying to steal. Turner got an excellent jump, the pitcher, Justin Verlander, does not control the running game well, and under these conditions, the runner is caught stealing just 14% of the time. It took a perfect throw from Bailey to nail Turner, and Bailey is rewarded heavily for this throw, as he should be. On this throw though, Bailey should have gotten the out as there was an 89% out probability. Meanwhile, this stolen base by Jordan Lawler was practically free. You can see how good of a jump he got off of second base. Bailey isn't penalized at all for this one as he had a 0% chance to throw him out. Over the course of the full season, we can use these estimated out probabilities to judge how much value a catcher provided with his arm. Bailey ranks first among catchers in caught stealings above average since 2023 with 25, and second place isn't really close. And all of this is just one of the aspects of catcher defense. Blocking is next. One of the catcher's other jobs is to make sure that pitches don't get past them, as that would allow any runners on base to advance. Traditional approaches to model these outcomes were passed balls and wild pitches. The difference between those? Well, the all-powerful, all-knowing entity known as the official scorer gets to decide that. This is obviously a little unreliable, so we'll use a similar approach that we did for the caught stealings above average for blocks above average. It takes in a bunch of inputs such as pitch location and pitch movement to estimate the probability that the pitch gets stopped on average. This lets us treat each block attempt differently with a reward or penalty to the catcher weighted on how hard the block is. This year, Bailey had 5 blocks above average, which was 10th in the league in 2025. Alejandro Kirk held the first place spot with 21 blocks above average. So far, Bailey hasn't looked like the best defender of all time with these two aspects, but we do have one left. Framing. Catcher framing is one of the most controversial yet most valuable aspects of baseball that's really never treated as such, and this, as you may know, is where Patrick Bailey really stands out. Since 2023, when Bailey debuted at the major league level, there have been a few catchers that have stood out in the framing department. Alejandro Kirk, Austin Hedges, Cal Raleigh, Austin Wells, and Jose Trevino all had over 20 framing runs in that span. Kirk had the most of those players with 35. If you add on the value of the second most, Hedges, that is right about where Patrick Bailey is with 65. The gap between him and second place Alejandro Kirk is about the same gap from second place to 0. But what are framing runs anyway? Each framing run that a catcher is awarded is a run that the catcher prevented by getting strike calls. Framing is the art of receiving a pitch so that it's more likely to be called a strike by the home plate umpire. Bailey has done this at a level that we've only seen by one other player, which we'll talk about that a little later. Pitches that are 3 to 4 inches inside the strike zone are called strikes 96% of the time. That percentage goes down as you go further out from the zone. Bailey, though, gets called strikes at a much higher rate than average in every range. There are two aspects to framing, making sure strikes are called strikes and also influencing balls to be called strikes. Bailey is the best at both. Now let's add another column to this. One of the worst framers since 2023, Martin Maldonado. You can see how many more strikes that Bailey gets compared to Maldonado. Their overall strike rates were separated by 10 percentage points, which is a huge difference. Pitchers that throw to Patrick Bailey are getting 25% more of their pitches called strikes than they do if they were to throw to Martin Maldonado. You can take all these stolen strikes and translate them into run value. Approximately 8 strikes is equal to 1 run, according to Baseball Savant. Yes, strikes are that valuable. That is an 86 run difference, or roughly 9 wins. That's basically 3 wins a year dedicated to only the difference of poor and elite framing. That is pretty valuable. There are a few reasons why Bailey has become one of the best framers that the league has ever seen. The main difference is something that happens before the pitch is even thrown, the stance that the catcher takes. This is Bailey when he was catching at NC State. Now this is Bailey in the major leagues. Notice anything different? It's a completely different stance. In college, Bailey and almost every other catcher at the time caught with both knees up in a squatting position, though now almost every catcher is catching with at least one knee down. Take a look at this graph that shows the rate of pitches that are caught with at least one knee down. It was 24% when it began being tracked in 2020, then began to rise rapidly over the past 5 years until now, where it's at a staggering 95%. In 2020, only 4 of the 38 qualified catchers were primarily catching with a knee down: Gary Sanchez, Austin Nola, Salvador Perez, and Wilson Ramos. This season, there was only 1 qualified catcher that was primarily catching with both knees up, and that was Kyle Higashioka for the Rangers. So what's the reason behind the change in stance? Well, it gets the catcher and glove closer to the ground and also makes them more stable. In a traditional squat, a catcher's glove must travel down, then up to receive a low pitch, increasing motion and more noise for the umpire to look at. In a one-knee stance, the glove can start lower and move up slightly through the zone on contact, and that subtle upward motion sells a strike to the umpire. It also allows an umpire a clearer view of the zone and clearer view of how the catcher receives the pitch. The traditional method also is a lot more unstable, and if a pitch isn't where the catcher expects it to be, it makes it look a lot worse than it actually was. In the past 6 years, when the catcher stances were recorded, pitches caught with the traditional stance led to negative 132 framing runs. But pitches that were caught with the knee down method generated a plus 223 framing runs. Yeah, you can see why the change caught on so quickly. The Giants had Bailey transition to this style of catching as soon as he was drafted. Since then, he has stolen the Giants several runs in their favor, all by persuading the home plate umpire. Bailey's own key to framing is to match the plane of the pitch, essentially taking the pitch's movement and drawing a line in the direction pointing to the center of the zone. Depending on the pitcher, his stance and strategy can change. When catching Logan Webb's heavy sinker, he can make an exaggerated turn to pull the outside sinker in, and a more subtle one to pull the inside sinker in. Because he works from a low stance, he can pull up the low sinker as well into the zone. Against Camilo Doval's high-velocity cutter and slider mix, he adjusts his posture and glove turn to absorb the ball's break without drifting out of the zone. The key is, he never rotates his glove when catching the pitch. It always stays on plane with the pitch and makes it much more likely for a strike call to be given. His main strength is he makes these catches look effortless. It's easy to forget that he's catching 90+ mile/hour pitches that have several inches of break on them in any given direction. This effortlessness adds another layer of psychological manipulation to the umpire. If the umpire sees a pitch that's easy to catch, then the chances of them calling it a strike go up. If you make it look like the pitch was hard to catch, like JT Realmuto often does, then the umpire is less likely to call that pitch a strike. This unique combination of different stances, different techniques, and consistency has made Bailey the most valuable framer of all time. And when you add on the other aspects of his catcher defense, he's prevented 79 runs compared to an average player in 3 seasons, a mark that no other player has come close to recently. And just a reminder, a run prevented on defense is just as valuable as a run scored on offense. There was only one player that could challenge him for that title. How could a player be better than Bailey? We looked at all these numbers, saw those huge gaps on the graphs. Who could it be? Are we talking about Ozzie Smith, Yadier Molina, Buster Posey? No, it's Austin Hedges. Unfortunately, we don't have as reliable defensive data on most of the players to play in the history of the game. Using the best available data for Ozzie Smith, his best 3 defensive seasons of his career were 32 runs, 21 runs, and 21 runs. That total is lower than Bailey's only 3 seasons. Just to put it in perspective on how good Bailey's been. Though he does have one rival. The only catcher to have a higher strike rate than Bailey since he entered the league is Austin Hedges. Barely. But barely in this case is significant because if you're better than Patrick Bailey by any margin, then well, you gotta be doing something right. Austin Hedges is probably on the same level of framing that Bailey is, and he's also above average in throwing and blocking. Though he has one problem. He literally can't hit. Hedges' career WRC plus sits at 50, which means he's 50% less productive than the league average hitter and less productive than Zach Greinke. The universal DH was implemented a few years ago, but Hedges is still leaving some semblance of a pitcher hitting. He actually even has a respectable career pitching line too. This makes managers and front offices think twice about putting Hedges into the starting lineup. Since rejoining the Guardians over the past 2 seasons, Hedges has played in 132 games, and the offensive numbers are not pretty. I won't force you to stare at these numbers too long, as it probably increases your chances of blindness. His overall value though, according to FWAR for that same time span, was 1.6, which is significantly above replacement level. Nolan Schanuel played 132 games in 2025, the same that Hedges has played the past 2 years, and Schanuel was an above average hitter, but was less valuable in those games than Hedges was. That is just how valuable Hedges' defense is. But the Guardians have Bo Naylor, who's a better overall player, ultimately costing Hedges playing time, which was the story for most of his career. Patrick Bailey, on the other hand, doesn't have that same problem. You see, if you look at these hitting numbers, you would say, wow, those are not good. But these are actually elite offensive numbers. These are the best offensive numbers that we've seen for a catcher that is this good on defense. He's been doubly as productive at the plate than Hedges has been over the past few years, and there are qualified hitters in the league today that are worse than him. The fact that he's not the absolute worst hitter in the league allows the Giants to put him into the lineup with a lot more confidence, and because of this playing time, Bailey's defensive value stacks up to the point where he has over 10 F-WAR since 2023. Only 42 other players can say the same, and the worst hitter out of those 42 is Dansby Swanson with a WRC plus of 101. Bailey's once again was 76, and that's just how good his defense is. Hedges and Bailey may have similar defensive talent, but Bailey's offense has allowed his defensive value to far overshadow what Hedges and other elite defenders have done. Even though his defense to the naked eye may not look as flashy or impressive as some of the other notable defenders, what Bailey does is not easy. It takes ample athleticism, flexibility, and consistency that no other catcher has ever displayed before. Bailey's career is just getting started though, and if he really wants to be crowned the most valuable defender of all time, we have to look into the future. And the future for the catcher position is about to change forever. As you may know, Major League Baseball is finally implementing the automatic ball and strike challenge system next season. Teams will have up to 2 incorrect challenges to overturn ball or strike calls. This on the surface may seem to threaten Bailey and framing as a whole, though that is not the case. Who would have thought that Google's AI overview was actually wrong? In spring training, when this system was tested this year, the average game had 4.1 challenges attempted in it. Roughly 50% of those challenges were successful, meaning that there were on average 2 successful challenges per game. Now, that is for both teams. Per team, there was roughly 1 overturned call per game. And not all of these will hurt the catcher, some of them will be called balls that are challenged to be strikes, which would help the catcher. It won't eliminate framing like some have theorized, but it will just slightly dampen it, which was exactly what Bailey said when he was asked about it. I don't think it's going to change the game as much as I originally thought it would, Bailey said. I think it's just going to take away the really big misses. The best framers will be a little less valuable, while the worst are going to be a little more valuable, meaning that Patrick Bailey and his framing are not going anywhere. And when you add on what else he can do at the catcher position, blocking and throwing, he's the best defender in the league today, and very well could end up being the most valuable defender that the game has ever seen. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.